I've worked galleys on 3 different bases, and I'll tell you something most people don't understand about a mess hall. It's the loudest, most honest room on any station. Out on the deck, in the briefings, in the corridors, everybody wears their rank like a mask. But in the chow line with a tray in their hands and an empty stomach, you see who people really are. Who shares, who shoves, who waits their turn, and who decides the rules don't apply to them. That's why I remember the day she walked in, not because anything happened right away. Nothing did for almost 2 weeks. I remember it because of how quiet she was in a room that was never quiet. My name's Daniel Reyes. Back then I was a culinary specialist, which is a fancy way of saying I cooked and served and scrubbed pans for about 600 sailors twice a day at a coastal naval station that I'm not going to name here. It was an old base. Concrete buildings the color of wet sand, salt in the air all the time, gulls screaming over the dumpsters out back. The kind of place where the paint peels and nobody bothers to fix it because there's always something more important breaking. The mess hall was the heart of it. Long steel tables, fluorescent lights that buzzed if you stood too still and listened. The smell of coffee that never fully went away, burned into the walls after decades. And the noise, always the noise, trays clattering, boots scuffing, 200 conversations stacked on top of each other. She came in on a Tuesday. I know it was a Tuesday because Tuesday was meatloaf, and I was elbow deep in a hotel pan of it when I looked up and saw a face I didn't recognize. That alone was strange. On a base that size, you think you wouldn't notice one new person, but you do. You learn the faces the way you learn the streets in your neighborhood. New faces stand out like a chair moved 6 inches from where it always sat. She was maybe 30, hard to tell. She had one of those faces that could have been 28 or 38 depending on the light. Brown hair pulled back tight and plain, no makeup, working uniform, the everyday kind, nothing flashy on it, nothing that told you what she did. She moved through the line without a word, took her tray, said thank you to me when I dropped the meatloaf on her plate, quiet, like she actually meant it and wasn't just saying it. Most people don't say thank you to the guy serving the meatloaf. You'd be surprised. After a while you stop expecting it, so I noticed. She sat alone, corner table, back to the wall, facing the door. I didn't think much of that at the time. Plenty of people sit with their back to the wall. It's only later, thinking about it, that I realized she always sat the same way. Always where she could see the whole room and both exits. Always done eating before anybody else, fast and clean, then just sitting there with her coffee, watching. Not starring, just aware. The way a lifeguard watches a pool full of kids who don't know they're being watched. Her uniform tape said VANCE. That's all I knew about her for almost 2 weeks. Vance, the quiet one in the corner, I figured she was new logistics, maybe a transfer doing some kind of admin rotation. We got those sometimes, people passing through, you learn not to get attached. Now I have to tell you about the other group, because you can't understand what happened without them. Every mess hall has its loud table. Ours was run by a petty officer named Marcus Briggs and the 4 or 5 guys who orbited around him like he was the sun. Briggs was big, not just tall but wide, the kind of big that takes up 2 seats in an aisle. He had a laugh you could hear from the serving line, and he laughed a lot, mostly at other people. He'd been on the base longer than almost anybody, and somewhere along the way he decided that made the mess hall his. You knew the type? There's one on every base, in every job, in every town probably. The guy who confuses being loud with being strong. Briggs and his boys had a routine. They'd take the center table, the best one, even if somebody was already sitting there. They'd borrow food off other people's trays as a joke that nobody else found funny. They'd pick a target, usually somebody young, somebody fresh out of boot, somebody who didn't know yet that the right thing to do was just take it and walk away, and they'd ride that kid for weeks. Most of us hated it. I want to be honest about that because it'd be easy to tell this story like the whole base was scared of Briggs. We weren't scared, we were just tired. And tired is its own kind of trap. You tell yourself it's not your business. You tell yourself the kid'll toughen up. You tell yourself somebody above your pay grade should handle it, and you keep your head down and serve the meatloaf. I'm not proud of that, I'm just telling you how it was. The kid that month was a seaman named Tommy Ackheffer, 18 years old, maybe 19, tall and thin like he'd grown 6 inches in a year and his body hadn't caught up. He had this way of apologizing for things that weren't his fault. Somebody bumped him, he said sorry. The line moved slow, he said sorry. He was the nicest kid in the building, and Briggs smelled that on him the way a dog smells fear. It started small, it always does. They'd take Tommy's seat so he had to stand there with his tray looking for somewhere to go, his face going red while they laughed. They'd flick stuff at him, call him names that I won't repeat. One time Briggs accidentally knocked Tommy's whole tray onto the floor and then made him clean it up while the table laughed, and the worst part, the part that stuck with me, was that Tommy apologized while he was cleaning it, said sorry to the floor, to the mess he didn't make. And Vance watched. I didn't notice it the first day, or the second, but by the end of that first week I caught it. She'd be in her corner with her coffee, and when Briggs's table started up on Tommy, her eyes would go to it. She didn't move, didn't say anything, her face didn't even change, not really, but she watched. Every time, the way you'd watch a pot you knew was about to boil over. One afternoon, this was maybe day 10, Tommy came through my line and his hands were shaking, just a little. He was trying to hold his tray steady and he couldn't quite do it and he wouldn't look at me. I put extra on his plate. I don't know why. It felt like the only thing I had to give him, an extra scoop of mashed potatoes, like that was going to fix anything. He whispered thanks and shuffled off to find a corner to disappear into. And I looked over at Vance and she was looking at Tommy too, and then her eyes moved to me, just for a second, and I swear it was like she was reading my mind, like she knew exactly what I was thinking, which was, somebody should do something, and under that the uglier thought, but not me. She didn't nod, she didn't smile. She just looked back at her coffee. I want to describe her a little more because in my head she's got almost mythical over the years, and that's not fair to who she actually was. She wasn't big. That's the thing people get wrong when I tell this story. They picture some towering figure. She wasn't. She was average height, maybe a little under. Lean, but not in a way you'd notice across a room. If you passed her in the hall you wouldn't look twice. That was kind of the whole point, I think, though I didn't understand that yet. The only unusual thing about her, physically, was her hands. I noticed them when she set her tray down at my line. They were scarred, not dramatic, no missing fingers or anything, just rough, knuckles that had been broken and healed a few times, calluses in places I couldn't account for, working hands, hands that had done something. I figured maybe she'd been a mechanic, lots of explanations for rough hands. There were a lot of explanations I made up for Vance in those 2 weeks, all of them wrong. The day it happened was a Thursday. I remember because Thursday was the good day, fried chicken. The line was longest on Thursdays, everybody trying to get there before we ran out of thighs. The mess hall was packed, every table full, the noise cranked up to its loudest. Hot outside, one of those heavy afternoons where the air conditioning couldn't keep up and everybody was a little sweaty and a little short-tempered. Tommy came in late, the line had thinned out by then. He got his chicken, I made sure he got a good piece, and he turned around to find a seat. And there weren't any, not in the safe spots, not in the corners. The only open seats were near Briggs's table. I watched him stand there. I watched him do the math that every kid like Tommy learns to do. Where can I sit that won't turn into a thing? And there was nowhere. So he picked a seat one table over from Briggs, as far as he could get, and he sat down and put his head down and started eating fast, trying to be invisible. It didn't work, it never works. Briggs saw him, I saw Briggs see him. And Briggs got that look, that grin, and he said something to his boys and they all turned to look at Tommy, and I felt my stomach drop because I just knew that today was going to be worse than the tray on the floor. I didn't know how much worse, and I didn't know yet that the quiet woman in the corner had decided she was done watching. It started with the salt. Briggs picked up the salt shaker off his table and lobbed it at Tommy. Underhand, lazy, like he was tossing a kid a ball. It bounced off Tommy's shoulder and clattered onto the floor. "Hey," Briggs called out, "pick that up." Tommy froze. The whole thing about Tommy was that he never knew what to do, and in that moment of not knowing he just sat there, half-turned, fork in his hand, his face already going that deep red. "You deaf?" I said. "Pick it up." Briggs stood. His chair scraped back loud enough that a few nearby tables glanced over. "You knocked it off my table." He hadn't. Everybody saw it. Briggs threw it. But that's how it works with guys like Briggs, isn't it? They say a lie loud enough and dare you to correct them, and most people won't because correcting them means becoming the target, and so the lie just stands there in the room, true by force. Tommy got up, started toward the salt shaker, and one of Briggs's boys, a wiry guy named Petrov, mean little laugh, stuck his foot out. Tommy went down hard, tray and all. Fried chicken across the floor, his drink exploding, mashed potatoes on his uniform. The whole mess hall heard it, that crash, then a beat of silence, then Briggs's table just roaring with laughter. And something in that laughter was different that day, uglier. They'd been escalating for weeks and there was nowhere left to go but cruelty, and they'd found it. Tommy was on his hands and knees on the floor in front of 200 people, and he was God, he was apologizing again. "Sorry, sorry," scrambling to pick up the chicken, and his voice cracked, and I realized the kid was about to cry, and I started to come out from behind the line because enough was enough. I didn't have a plan, I just couldn't watch it anymore. And she got there first. I didn't even see her stand up. 1 second she was in her corner, the next she was just there between Tommy and Briggs's table, and she crouched down next to Tommy on the floor and started helping him pick up the chicken. Calm, like it was the most normal thing in the world, like they were two people who dropped some groceries. "You okay?" she asked him, quiet just for him. Tommy nodded, not looking up, his ears burning. "Don't apologize," she said, still quiet. "You didn't do anything." She helped him up, got his tray, and then she straightened and she turned and she looked at Briggs's table. The laughter had stopped, because this was new. Nobody ever stepped in. The unwritten rule of the room was that Briggs got to do what Briggs did, and now this woman nobody knew was standing in the middle of it. "He tripped," Briggs said. The grin was still there, but it had gone a little tight. "Clumsy kid." "He didn't trip." Vance's voice wasn't loud. "That's what I remember most." She didn't yell, she didn't get up in anybody's face, she just stated it flat like a fact off a clipboard. "Your friend tripped him, you threw the salt, we all watched it." You could have heard a pin drop. The whole mess hall was listening now, even the tables in the back, everybody tuned in to this thing happening in the middle of the room. Briggs stood up to his full height, and he was big, I told you, and Vance in front of him looked small, and I think that's exactly what he was counting on. He stepped around the table. His boys stood up too, Petrov and two others, Hicks and a big quiet one they called Tank. They came around the table and they spread out, and just like that they had her surrounded. A loose half-circle of 4 guys, all of them bigger than her, closing in. "You new here," Briggs said, looking down at her. "Let me explain how it works." "I know how it works," Vance said. "Then you know you just made a real bad call." He took another step. They all did. The circle tightened, and Briggs leaned down into her space and he said it, the line I'll never forget, the line that the whole base would be repeating for months afterward. He jabbed a finger toward her face and he said, "We will destroy you, you understand me, you and that kid both, we will end you. And here's the thing I need you to understand." She didn't flinch. 4 men around her. The biggest one threatening to end her, 6 inches from her face, the whole room watching and nobody helping. And Erin Vance just stood there with her hands loose at her sides, completely relaxed, and looked up at Marcus Briggs with an expression I can only describe as patient. The way you'd look at a kid throwing a tantrum in a store, not scared, not even angry, just waiting, like she'd seen so much worse than 4 loud men in a cafeteria that this didn't register as a threat at all. She let the silence sit for a second, then she said very calmly, "I'm going to give you one chance to sit back down." Petrov laughed. "Or what? Or this stops being something you walk away from with a story to tell." She still hadn't raised her voice. "I'm not going to fight you, I want to be clear about that. There are 4 of you, you're all worked up, and somebody would get hurt and it'd be one of you, and then there'd be paperwork and a board and your careers would be over for putting hands on somebody in a chow hall over a salt shaker." She let that land. "I'm trying to do you a favor, sit down, eat your chicken, leave the kid alone." And this never happened. It was such a strange thing to say in that moment that I think it actually rattled them. They'd expected her to back down or to swing. Instead, she was standing in the middle of the circle calmly explaining the consequences to them like a teacher, offering them a way out. And the wildest part was that she clearly, completely meant it. She wasn't bluffing. She was genuinely trying to keep them from ruining their own lives. Briggs didn't take it. Of course he didn't. He couldn't, not in front of his boys, not in front of the whole room. Backing down would have been worse for him than anything she could do. So he did the thing guys like Briggs always do when they've talked themselves into a corner. He put his hand on her. He grabbed her by the front of her uniform, bunched the fabric in his fist, and shoved her back a step. "Don't you tell me to sit down," he started. "You don't get to come in here and—" I never found out how that sentence ended. Because what happened next happened so fast that to this day I can't replay it in slow motion no matter how hard I try. My brain just doesn't have the frames. One instant Briggs had a fistful of her uniform. The next instant, and I mean the very next instant, Briggs was face down on the steel table, his arm bent up behind his back at an angle arms aren't supposed to bend, and Vance was standing over him perfectly calm, having not appeared to hurry at all. She hadn't hit him, that's what got me. There was no punch, no big movie move. She just taken his wrist and stepped and turned, and the laws of physics did the rest, and now the biggest, loudest man on the base was pinned to a lunch table by a woman half his size, going absolutely nowhere, his cheek pressed against the steel. The mess hall made a sound I'd never heard it make, a kind of collective intake of breath. Petrov moved first, lunged at her, and she didn't even let go of Briggs, she just shifted her weight and put a foot somewhere, and Petrov's lunge turned into a sprawl across the floor, and he sat up dazed with no real idea how he'd gotten down there. Hicks and Tank just stopped. They looked at their 2 friends on the ground, and they looked at her, still standing, still calm, still holding Briggs against the table with what looked like almost no effort, and whatever was in their heads, it wasn't, "Let's be next." I asked you to sit down, Vance said to Briggs against the table, not even out of breath. I really did try. And that's the moment the doors opened. There were 3 of them. They came in through the main doors at the far end of the mess hall, and I noticed them right away because they didn't look like the rest of us. It's hard to explain. They had the right uniforms, but they wore them differently. They moved differently. Loose and easy and aware, taking in the whole room in one sweep the second they stepped through the door. 2 men and leading them an older one, gray at the temples, with the kind of weathered face that spent 30 years outdoors in bad places. I found out later he was a Master Chief. Command Master Chief, actually, of a naval special warfare unit that was on our base that week for some kind of training rotation nobody had told the galley about. But I didn't know any of that yet. All I knew was that 3 serious-looking men had just walked into the middle of the strangest moment our mess hall had ever seen. The Master Chief took it in. Briggs pinned to the table, Petrov on the floor, 2 more guys frozen mid-circle, and in the center of it all, calm as a Sunday morning, Vance. And his whole face changed. I'd braced for him to bark, to demand to know what the hell was going on, to start handing out charges. That's what any senior man walks into a scene like that and does. Instead, the Master Chief stopped, and something crossed his face that I can only call relief, like a man who'd been looking for someone and just found them safe. Vance, he said, and then he grinned, this big weathered grin, and he said it loud enough for the whole room to hear, in a tone that was half exasperation and half pure affection. I leave you alone for 15 minutes. Vance let go of Briggs, stepped back. Briggs came up off the table holding his arm, his face white, and he started to say something, and then he saw the Master Chief and the 2 operators behind him, and he saw the way they were standing, and the words died in his throat. Master Chief, Vance said, easy, like she'd run into him at the grocery store, just a misunderstanding. The Master Chief walked closer. His eyes went around the circle of Briggs's boys, slow, reading every one of them, and they seemed to shrink under it. Then he looked at Briggs, who was still cradling his arm, and the Master Chief's voice got very quiet, and somehow that was scarier than any shouting could have been. Son, he said, do you have any idea who you just put your hands on? Briggs didn't answer, couldn't. This is Chief Special Warfare Operator Aaron Vance. He let the word sit in the air, seal. He didn't even have to say the word out loud, you could see it land on every face in the room. She got back 9 days ago from a deployment I'm not going to talk about in a chow hall. There are men walking around alive today because of decisions she made under fire. She's here on a quiet week of rest before she goes and teaches your instructors a thing or two. He leaned in slightly. And you grabbed her by the shirt, over a salt shaker. I will never forget Briggs's face. All that bigness, all that loudness just drained right out of him. He looked like a balloon 3 days after the party. Here's where the story could have ended ugly, and where Vance surprised me one more time. The Master Chief turned to her. You want to press this? Because I'll have all 4 of them in front of a board by tonight. Assault, harassment, I've got 200 witnesses. He wasn't bluffing either. He could have ended these 4 men's careers with a phone call, and they all knew it. And you could see them realizing it one by one, the full weight of what they'd done finally crashing down. And Vance looked at Briggs, at Petrov picking himself up off the floor, at the 2 others, 4 young men whose whole world had just collapsed in front of everybody they knew, and then she looked at Tommy, standing off to the side with his ruined tray, 18 years old, who hadn't asked for any of this. No, she said. The Master Chief raised an eyebrow. No. No board? She walked over to the salt shaker, the one that had started the whole thing, picked it up off the floor and set it back on the table. A small thing, almost gentle. Then she straightened and looked at Briggs, and she spoke to him directly, and her voice wasn't hard anymore. It was almost tired. You want to know why I'm not going to end your career, she said. Because I've buried people, real ones, good ones, who never got to be loud and stupid in a cafeteria because they didn't make it home. And every single one of them would trade anything to be standing where you're standing right now. Alive, healthy, with a whole life ahead of them and nothing wrong except being a jerk who can still fix it. She paused. So I'm not going to take your future. I'm going to make you waste it being better. Nobody said a word. That kid, she said, nodding at Tommy. You've been riding him for weeks, I watched. From now on, he's the safest sailor on this base. You're going to make sure of it, all 4 of you. Anything happens to him, anybody so much as bumps his tray, I find out, and then I let the Master Chief make his phone call. We clear. Briggs nodded. He couldn't get words out, but he nodded, and it was real. You could see it was real. Something had actually broken loose inside him. And then it happened, the thing that, honestly, more than the wrist lock, more than the reveal, is the part of this story that still gets me. Petrov, getting up off the floor, was in a hurry to get away from the whole situation. He backed up fast, not looking where he was going, straight toward the serving line, toward the spot where one of my coworkers had left a deep pan of fry oil sitting on a cart to cool. Still hot, hot enough to take the skin off you. And Petrov was about to back right into it, was going to put his hand down on the edge of it to catch himself, and nobody else even saw. Vance saw. She was across the room. There's no way she should have gotten there in time, but she did. She closed that distance like the floor wasn't even there, and she caught Petrov by the back of his collar and yanked him clear half a second before his hand would have come down on that oil, spun him away from it, steadied him on his feet. Petrov stood there blinking, not understanding, and then he saw the pan, saw how close he'd come, saw who'd pulled him back, the same woman he'd just helped surround, the woman he'd lunged at, the one who'd put him on the floor. She let go of his collar, patted it flat, almost absent-minded, the way you'd fix a friend's jacket. Careful was all she said. That broke him. I watched a grown man's eyes fill up right there in the chow hall. He didn't say anything. What do you say? The person you tried to hurt just saved your hide without a second's hesitation, on pure instinct, like it was nothing, like of course she would. That, I think, is the whole thing right there. That's who she was. The toughest person any of us had ever seen, and her reflex, her bone-deep, no-thinking reflex, wasn't to let the guy who wronged her get burned. It was to save him, even him, especially him. The Master Chief watched the whole thing, and he shook his head slow, and he said, mostly to himself, but I was close enough to hear it, "Yeah, that's her." They didn't press charges. Vance ate the rest of her chicken, cold by then, in her corner, and the 3 operators sat with her, and for once the loudest table in the mess hall was 4 men sitting in total silence, not looking at anybody. She shipped out a few days later. I never saw her again. I don't even know if Vance was her real life beyond that uniform, what her family was like, whether she had a dog or hated cilantro or any of the normal things you know about people you eat lunch near for 2 weeks. She came, she sat in the corner, she watched, and when it mattered she stood up. That's all I got. But I can tell you what she left behind. Briggs changed. I won't say he became a saint. But that table got quiet and stayed quiet, and Tommy Okafor, I watched it happen. Tommy ended up sitting with those same 4 guys within a month. Not as a target, as one of them. They looked out for him. I caught Briggs once, weeks later, helping Tommy carry a load of supplies, and when Briggs saw me watching he just kind of nodded sheepish and got back to work. Petrov was different too. Slower to laugh at people, quicker to help. Like he'd been handed something he hadn't earned and was trying to be worth it. People still talked about it for as long as I was on that base. "We will destroy you." It became a joke almost, the way Briggs had said it. Guys would say it to each other, ribbing around, "We will destroy you," and laugh. But underneath the joke there was something else, and everybody knew it. A reminder. Because that's the part that stuck with all of us, not the wrist lock, not even the reveal. It was the lesson sitting underneath the whole thing, plain as anything once you saw it. You never know who's sitting quietly in the corner. You never know what the person you're sneering at has carried, what they've survived, what they're capable of, what they've chosen not to do. The loudest person in the room is almost never the strongest. The strongest person in the room is usually the one who has nothing left to prove, eating alone, saying thank you to the guy serving the meatloaf, watching out for a kid who can't watch out for himself. I served chow on that base for 2 more years, cooked thousands of meals, forgot most of the faces, but I never forgot hers, and I never forgot what she said to Briggs before she walked away. She told him she wasn't going to take his future, she was going to make him waste it being better. I think about that more than I should, about how the toughest thing she did that day wasn't putting a man twice her size on a table. It was choosing not to ruin him when she easily could have. It was pulling Petrov back from that oil. It was mercy from someone who had every right to be done with mercy. Real strength, it turns out, is quiet. It sits in the corner, it says thank you, and it stands up not to win, not to prove anything, but because somebody smaller needs it too. That's the part nobody saw coming. And it's the only part that ever really mattered.